Afternoon. This is our Rise Africa group, and we're here this afternoon with one of our very distinguished guests and teachers and mentors on the African continent. We've got Dr. Pearl Kupe, who is an advanced practitioner in employment law and labor law. She's also a minister of the gospel, and her heart is the development of the African continent from the agenda of the kingdom, the agenda of God. Dr. Pearl Kupe is also a mentor, a seasoned mentor, who helps a lot of women, a lot of governments, a lot of policy makers on the continent in the development of our continent and for us as a people. What I love about Dr. Pearl Kupe is not only that she mentors me and a multitude of other people, she also, everything that she does and talks about is rooted in Christ, in the Word of God. She's a woman who does not compromise, and without that no compromising attitude and spirit, she has managed to get to the top in what she's called to do. Her motive is the agenda kingdom of God. She doesn't have an agenda for herself except that it be Christ and Him glorified in the church, in the home, in the business world, in the political world, all over wherever she is. Her mandate is to take this attitude of integrity into the kingdom and into the world. So welcome, Dr. Pearl Kupe. You have a long CV, but I've focused on your heart. And your heart, I know, is agenda for the kingdom, and that God be glorified in the secular world, in the business world. And you're here today to help us with this thing called Renaissance of Africa. Renaissance means change. Renaissance means change, and we want to see a change in our African continent, a change in our churches, in our leadership. But that has to start with integrity in me as an individual, and in other people, viewers who are watching, and in yourself. And as we individually walk and respond to Christ-like integrity and His principles, we believe we can have a renaissance and a change on our continent, a change for good. So welcome and help us here. Can you just introduce yourself again and just talk to us about leadership and integrity, the impact of integrity in leadership on Africa? Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Emily. And I really appreciate this opportunity. And once again, I want to say a big congratulations to you and the Arise Africa group. We've taken this journey, and I was so excited when you first talked to me about Arise Africa and the mandate behind Arise Africa and the Connected magazine, which was launched, I think, just a couple of years ago. So I do want to congratulate you. I'm passionate about Africa. And I'm passionate about the leaders of Africa. I do believe that this is Africa's time. And that when we're talking about Renaissance and talking about leadership, I don't think you can talk about that without talking about Africa in this season. And in fact, as you've rightly said, Renaissance has to do with change. And if you do an etymology or study of the word Renaissance, it actually is a French word which has to do with birthing, rebirthing. Renaissance en français. Si vous parlez français, ça c'est Renaissance. So it's a very strong word. It's not just about change, because when you're birthing, there's a transition. There's a period when you birth that is called the transition period, when a woman is giving birth. And that is the most difficult time for a woman during birth, is the transition time, is the time that she feels like giving up, but it's the time that precedes birthing immediately. And I feel like when we're talking about the Renaissance of Africa, this is exactly what's happening with us. We are rebirthing. It looks like a difficult time, but we must not give up, because as we always say, you always hear me say, Kenako, it's time. It's time for Africa to rebirth. And we're talking about, there's no way that we can rebirth or birth Africa without talking about leadership issues and integrity issues.
Absolutely.
We have heard many narratives around Africa, and many of the narratives are perverted narratives. And one of the things I do want to say is Africans, which is why your magazine is so important, Ems, So
Thank
I'm
you.
praying for that magazine
Yes,
because one of the mandates and agenda of that magazine is it
yeah,
must tell the story of Africa.
absolutely.
You know, there's so
Thank-
many people, nations,
Mhm,
news networks have tried to tell the story of Africa, whether
mhm,
it's BBC or CNN or
mhm.
whatever network, and it's never been the correct, accurate
Narrative.
narrative.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
in Africa, in fact,
Mhm,
we have an African proverb that
mhm,
says, until the lion
mhm.
tells his side of the story, the tale of the hunt will
Yeah.
always glorify the hunter.
Uh-huh. Okay, that is true.
So I
Mhm.
want to say,
Yeah,
Africa, you are that lion.
yeah. Tell it,
And
tell
for
it.
so long, it's the
Mhm,
hunter,
mhm.
the colonizers, the
Yeah,
ones who enslaved us, who've been telling the story of
yeah.
Africa. And it's
Mhm,
been a narrative of poverty and
yeah.
indebtedness and
Mhm.
famine and
Suffering.
hunger and
Mhm.
suffering and war and malnutrition and
Yeah,
disease. But
yeah,
Africa,
yeah.
we are the lion and we are a
Absolutely.
roaring lion and we know
Mhm.
about lions. And I want to
Absolutely.
say to us as
Mhm,
Africans, it's
mhm.
time to tell our own narrative.
Narrative.
So I'm
Mhm.
praying for Arise Africa magazine
Thank you so
and
much.
that God will use it
Yeah.
as a vehicle
Mhm,
and an instrument to tell the African narrative
mhm.
accurately and in
Yeah.
a way that we will be encouraged and
Mhm,
not humiliated. We
yeah.
will be provoked
Mhm.
and not, put into despair.
Yeah.
So,
100%.
talking about, like I've said, integrity and leadership, they go
Leadership.
hand
Yeah.
in hand. And the
Mhm,
problem that Africa has is not
mhm,
the narrative that has been thrown out there, a
mhm,
narrative of hunger and poverty,
mhm,
but the challenge of Africa has been a
mhm.
challenge of leadership.
Yeah, it
It's
has.
leadership.
It has.
As you've heard me say many
Mhm,
times, Africa
mhm.
is the richest continent in the world. We
It
are
is.
not a poor continent. We
Mhm,
have a enormous amount of resources, minerals,
mhm,
all those things,
mhm. Yeah.
Our challenge is one of leadership.
Yes.
And the challenge is one of the right kind of leadership. We're
Mhm,
looking for leaders with servant hearts, leaders who are coming to serve but not
mhm,
to oppress.
mhm,
In my language, my mother tongue, Setswana,
mhm.
we say "Khosi ke khosi ka batho." It
Okay.
means that
Mhm,
a chief or a
mhm.
king
Yeah.
is only a king because of the people.
Absolutely.
So
100%. Yeah.
his or her kingship is
Mhm.
rooted in the
In the
people.
people. Yeah.
So, in
Yeah.
other words, your only existence and
Yeah.
your only, as we would say in French, raison d'être, your
Mhm.
reason for being is
Yeah.
so that you can serve the people. It's
Absolutely.
not to objectify the people, oppress, or abuse them.
Mhm.
Your kingship and your leadership is so you can be a servant to them.
To the
So
people.
we are looking for servant leaders,
Mhm.
people who are coming to serve and
Mhm.
not
Mhm.
demand. People
Mhm.
are coming to give of their time and
Yeah.
their service
Yeah.
and not oppress
Mhm.
and abuse people.
Yeah.
And that kind of leadership requires integrity. You
Yes.
can never be
Mhm.
that kind of servant, righteous
Mhm.
leader
Mhm.
unless you have integrity. So
Yeah.
integrity is
Mhm.
integral and a
Mhm.
key part of leadership, the leadership
Absolutely.
that we need in
Mhm.
Africa to rebirth,
Yeah.
renaissance of Africa.
Mhm.
Integrity has to do with wholeness.
Mhm.
What do I mean by that? I
Mhm.
mean that it is the foundation to our wholeness.
Yeah.
Without integrity, we will not
Mhm.
be whole.
Yeah.
It has to do with good values.
Mhm.
It
Mhm.
has to do with character.
Yeah.
It's based on a set of common values which
Mhm.
incorporate morality and
Mhm.
ethics.
Absolutely.
And people with integrity are also people of character.
Yeah.
If I was preaching a sermon, I would go to
Mhm.
Galatians 5:22,
Yeah.
23,
Uh-huh.
which talks about the 9 fruit of the Spirit, the
Mhm.
evidence that you have
Mhm.
the Spirit of God living in you.
Mhm.
And it names things like the evidence of having the fruit of Spirit is, do you have love?
Yeah.
Do you have joy? Do you
Yeah.
have peace?
Yeah.
Do you have self-control?
Yeah.
So all those are character-based traits.
Mm-hmm.
And the Bible then tells us that you shall know them by their fruit. In other words, you will know the true leaders from the fake. The genuine leaders by their fruit. You shall know them by their character. You shall know them by their integrity. You shall know them by their good values, not necessarily by their eloquence, not necessarily by their following, not by the car they drive, not by how many qualifications they have, not by, all those materialistic things that we assign to a person who we think is powerful.
Amen.
But you will know them by their character. So it's very important. You cannot separate true leadership from integrity.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you so much, Apostle. That's really, really useful. And as you know, over the years, Africa has imbibed this culture of Ubuntu, which is compassion. We are raised that way, with people that are compassionate, with people that are giving, people that are harmony and family based.
Yes.
Why have we come away from that in not demonstrating integrity? In other words, what are the barriers?
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you've touched on Ubuntu, because Ubuntu, I don't see how we're going to have that renaissance and have that progression to moving towards the Africa we want to see without going back to our original values, which are all Ubuntu based. And, we use the word Ubuntu, which is a Zulu word. But one thing I've discovered is Ubuntu is actually, it's an African word. So in Setswana, the word for Ubuntu is Botho. Botho.
Right.
I discovered also, from a very close Yoruba speaking friend, that the word for Ubuntu in Yoruba, I think, is Ajoshe. I hope I'm pronouncing it right, but he said Ajoshe. Ajoshe in Yoruba. So if you were to interrogate every African nation, you will find that all of us have a word for Ubuntu, because it was a fundamental and key part of the African culture. It's always been a way of life. So integrity, you cannot separate integrity from Ubuntu. You cannot. It is a non-negotiable requirement for building our continent, whether you call it integrity alone or whether you package integrity as part of our Ubuntu practices. And the concept of Ubuntu itself is premised on integrity. Ubuntu speaks of what? It speaks of honoring others. Ubuntu speaks of the common good. Ubuntu speaks of benefiting everybody. So for instance, we have proverbs that say that a child belongs to the whole village. So that's talking about communal property, community of property, that we all partake in everything. It takes a village to raise up a child. Why? Because the child is not one person's responsibility. All of that is pointing towards Ubuntu. And in contrast, we find that many Western principles of success are rooted in individualism, are rooted in selfishness, the doctrine of survival of the fittest.
Ego.
That whoever climbs the ladder and whoever you have to take out in the course of climbing the ladder, whether it's a corporate ladder, whatever, it doesn't matter as long as you get there. That is really a foreign concept to the original culture of Africa. In the true culture of Africa, we climb together. We climb together. In fact, I think you've heard me tell the story about I think it's either a Harvard or Oxford educated professor who came to Africa, an African village. And he said to a group of African children, and he offered them a bag of candy, of sweets and candy. And he tried to get them to compete. And he said to them, whoever will run to that tree about 100 meters or yards away, he said, whoever gets there first, I'm going to give you this bag of sweets. And he told the children, he said, do you understand? They said, yes.
Yes.
And then he began, to take them through the process. On your marks,
Yeah.
get set, ready,
Yes.
steady. And as he said steady, the children all linked their hands together. And when he said go, they all ran at the same pace, keeping in step with one another and ensuring that they touched the tree, the finish line at the same time so that they all won. And when he couldn't understand that, they explained to him that this is Ubuntu. They said, you don't understand. He said to them, you didn't understand what I meant.
Yeah.
One person was supposed to win. And they said, no, you don't understand how we live. And they said to him, it's not a win unless we all win. We all have to win. And that is the challenge before us as Africans, as African nations, as African leaders, to get to a place where we truly walk in Ubuntu and we say it's not a win until we all win. It's not a win until we're all eating. Not just a few privileged are eating. It's not a win until we all have access to electricity.
Absolutely.
It's not a win until we all have access to decent accommodation. It's not a win until we have good roads. It's not a win until we all have access to good health. And it's not just the privilege of a few who can afford to fly themselves to London. Why should our government ministers, Emmy, why should our government ministers be flying themselves to the United States and to London? They should be ensuring that they're decent enough hospitals in the country that they themselves can go to. What message are they sending to us if you are a minister of health and you are flying yourself and your children out to seek medical attention outside of your nation? All you're telling me is that you've not done your job. That the hospital that's not good enough for your children is not good enough for your children. It should be. When it gets to the point where the Minister of Health is seeking medical attention in his own nation, I will then say you've done a good job, because if that hospital, you feel you can put your life in the hands of the medical doctors and the equipment that's there, then you've done a good job. But if you still have to travel overseas, then I put it to you, as we say in legalese, that you've not done your job well enough. So Ubuntu is critical. If we want Africa to be a leading and a winning continent, we have to go back to Ubuntu principles. And what's very interesting is that when we were practicing Ubuntu, many of the challenges we find ourselves in, we didn't have them. Do you know, I don't know, maybe in Shona or Sindebele, I don't know if you have a word for this, but I was trying to think of the word for corruption in any of the SADC, the Bantu languages. We don't have a word for corruption.
No, there isn't.
I thought about it and I was like, wait a minute, I can't think of a single African language where we have a word for corruption. So what does that tell us? It tells us something. It tells us already that corruption is a foreign concept to our African culture. Anytime you don't have a word in your language, it means that thing was previously non-existent. So corruption was never something that was intrinsic to our way of life, because we were practicing Ubuntu, we were practicing Butu, that we were practicing Ajoshe, meaning that all of us must eat. Traditionally, if you come into a house when Africans are eating, the first thing they will ask you to do, unlike the Western culture, the Western culture people will tell you, oh, we're still eating, have a seat over there and wait for us. But according to African tradition, you come in and find people they'll say, come and join us, come, let's eat. And even if you're eating from the same bowl, everybody must eat, and everybody honors everybody. There's not one person who's rushing to eat everything. So this concept of eating alone and rushing to eat and finish everything is not intrinsic to our culture. It's learned behavior.
Yeah.
And so if we want to talk about integrity and servant leadership and leadership, we have to go back to those Ubuntu-based values, which say that all of us must eat. The whole community must eat. The whole society must eat. And in particular, we need to take care of the disadvantaged. We need to look after our widows. We need to look after our orphans. Do you know that, even orphanhood is quite foreign to us? Because if there was a child whose parents died, they would automatically be taken in by the community.
Absolutely.
They would be parented. They would not be sent to an institution, but they would be parented. That's why even in Africa still today, we don't have really old folk homes.
No.
We don't have those because for us, the concept of extended family and taking care of our own is an intrinsic part of us. So, for us, it's quite difficult to think of sending your mother to an old folks home. It's like, you don't want her. Are you sending me away?
Yeah, it doesn't happen.
It's like you're rejecting your parents. So Ubuntu definitely must be a key part. And I want to say this, Ubuntu is not only for Africa. I think it's an opportunity for us as Africans to actually role model it and spread it globally. And begin to change the blueprints around the world. When I was in Morocco a few years ago at a function hosted by the King of Morocco, and I was speaking at the Africa Women Leaders Forum, I had the privilege of having a discussion with somebody who's my good friend now, Princess Camille. And I explained this whole concept of Ubuntu. And she immediately said to me, she's from Austria, Princess Camille from Austria. She said, my God, this is such a powerful concept. And she said, in as much as Europe, we colonized you, but she said, this is something you as Africans must teach us. So I believe this is an opportune time for us not only to revert to our original culture of Ubuntu, bringing Ubuntu in the economic system, bringing Ubuntu into the governmental structures, bringing Ubuntu in not only into the family, but into every system and every structure. When you bring in Ubuntu, things like bribery, corruption is based on self. I want to eat. And I will, whatever way I can find to extort money out of you is fine. But when it's back to Ubuntu, you will not be operating in those selfish, illegal kind of ways, because it's about the community benefiting, communal benefit, and not just individual benefit.
That's really good. Thank you so much for that narrative. That's a powerful narrative that we need to carry as individuals. Now, the question out there, if someone was watching this and listening to you, they're already in government, they're already a leader. It may be in the corporate world or in governance, or they're a policymaker, or they're a church leader. They'll be asking, okay, but how do I go back to Ubuntu? How do I translate this Ubuntu that I know how to behave? I know it's biblically based, because it is based on the word of God, togetherness, harmony. How do I then translate it when I enter the door of when I'm in governance? Because there's a phrase that somebody said, I can't remember the quote, the person who wrote it, but I think they said something along the lines of, be the change or be the culture you want to be. So in terms of governance and leadership, wherever they are, how does an individual who is watching this then say, I want to be that person? But there are parameters that control me, whether it be as a policymaker or as a leader in governance, in corporate. How do I carry this integrity, this Ubuntu, into my workplace? And then basically what I'm trying to say is, how is the reframing? How do we reframe? We've been told a lie. We didn't even know the word corruption didn't exist in us. The word bribe, I don't know if a word in my language for bribe, except that there's a slang word, which is not even a grammar term, right? But it came across because of slang. The young people, devised it. However, so how do we now, and how do we get our leaders and our people in positions of influence to unlearn that?
Yeah.
Carry on with integrity, because really it's a rebirth, like you said.
Yes,
Proper rebirth.
absolutely.
Mhm.
Absolutely. I think in terms of bringing change, and I
Yes.
think if I'm not wrong, I think that statement of be the change you want to see is apparently attributable to Mahatma Gandhi. I'm not sure, but that's what they say. Yeah. But in terms of bringing change, and what are some of the barriers? What are some of the things that need to be done? I think there are two levels.
Quite broad, I know.
Two levels where change needs to occur.
Yeah.
And I think, first of all, it starts with the individual.
Yes.
It starts with the individual. So each and every one of us, at whatever level you are, you may not be a member of parliament, you may not be, a government minister, but if you are paying police officers bribes, then you have, some aspect of answering. So we have to take accountability at an individual level. And ownership at an individual level. So there's a certain level of individual commitment. And then there's a level whereby systems and structures. So if you are a leader, for instance, one of the things you need to be looking at as a leader is to be looking to see to what degree has the system, whether it's the political system, the governmental system, the executive system, the judiciary, to what degree has it been infiltrated?
Right.
And what measures do I need to put in to ensure that what is happening, whether it's corruption, is no longer working? For instance, let me give you an example. One of the things I'm doing currently with some of my friends globally is working on an anti-corruption strategy.
Yes, I'm aware of that.
That now will be looking at systems and structures, because you can come as an individual who is righteous, who has a pure heart and a clean heart, with all the good intentions. But if you don't change the systems and structures, the corruption and the rot will continue.
Absolutely.
And that's why if I was preaching, I would talk about Joseph, because Joseph came into a system that was not working, an Egyptian system, a corrupt system. It was dying. It was not functioning. But through the implementation of the dream, he changed the transportation system. He changed the forex system. He changed, the agricultural system. All of that. He affected and impacted the economic system and brought sustainable change. So you can come in as a righteous leader with integrity, but a righteous leader who has integrity on a corrupt system is not going to go far.
No.
And we have seen a lot of well-meaning presidents who have come in with good intentions, with good hearts, with a lot of energy, and eventually the system and structure chewed them up, swallowed them up, and spit them out. So it's not just about the individual. It's not just about having leaders with integrity. It's about how do we impact and affect the system and strategy? How do we stop the bleed, the corruption bleed? It's estimated that in Africa, by the African Union, and I think UNECA as well, estimates that we lose about $50 billion to corruption. And by the way, corruption is not just an African problem. Corruption is actually probably worse in some of the European and American countries. The only difference is that corruption in those countries, they have learned how to hide their corruption better. So I want to make that clear. I want to make that clear that most of the global recessions that have happened, that have impacted the whole globe, start from Wall Street. They start from Wall Street. They don't start from Soweto or Harare or anything. They're always starting from outside of Africa. So let's be clear on that Africa is not the home of corruption. The only thing is, perhaps to a certain degree, Africans are more honest because their corruption is more open. And they have not reached the level of knowing how to hide their corruption
No.
as well as the West
Yeah.
has.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
So that's
we
it.
need to look at structures, and in the anti-corruption strategy, for instance, that we're developing,
Yeah.
we're looking at the aspect of corruption. And so we're looking at nations with best practices. We're looking at the role of legislation. What role will legislation play in terms of acting as a deterrent to corruption and ensuring that those who engage in corruption are put away? We're looking at legislative limitations. We're looking at institutional limitations. What institutions need to be set up? Anti-corruption units need to be set up to ensure that they can, focus on the aspect of corruption. How does it need to be manned? How do those people need to be trained to ensure that they themselves do not become corrupt?
Yeah.
We're looking at technological and tracking issues to say, how do we track corruption, and what technology can we put in to track funding that comes in from the outside? Because most of the corruption that cannot be traced is funds that come out from outside, from international organizations that are untraceable. And so a lot of the corruption is internationally influenced. So how do we control that, and how do we track that? And looking at the educational limitations, how do we educate our own people on the effect of corruption? Because the corruption impacts everybody. It affects everybody in the nation. So those are some of the things that we need to look at. So like I said, there's two levels. There's a level at the individual, but it's not just about taking individual responsibility and ownership. There are so not just as an individual, but as nations and as policymakers, as you've said, and members of parliament and leaders, looking at how to bring change to the systems and the structures to ensure that they prevent corruption and provoke integrity in leadership and righteousness.
So one of the barriers I've been looking at, I'm talking now in the context of African and African leaders of all spheres, there's the issue of unity, ego, competition. So we're talking about, we want to run, you talked about the young people who run in together to get the reward all together. We'd like to imbibe that so that we're not, there is competition that's good and there's competition that is bad, where dog will eat dog, and I'll get this to the detriment of so and so and such and such. How do we foster for us to carry integrity forward, for us to influence the system, right? The parameters, the structures, the policy makers, there has to be an aspect of unity. For us to not imbibe and take on foreign languages, foreign attitudes, foreign ways of doing and being, there has to be an aspect of unity to know that if my sister or my brother is saying, let's do this, it is for us all as a unit, as a people, as a government, or as a nation, as a community, as a village. Because if we don't do that and bring in foreign attitudes and behaviors that are anti God's word, anti integrity, we are ruining our own selves. So the issue of unity, what have you got to say about bringing in, apart from integrity, but people being united in that attitude of taking forward integrity to change the system? Like you say, one person can't do it. So if me and 3-4 others in the company, or me and 3-4 in the government are united, we'll do a better job than one individual. So how do we bring that unity? And how do we get people thinking the same thing? This is what I'm asking.
Well, you've said it now. On two levels, unity is a biblical principle. If you go to Genesis 11:6, there's a statement that God makes to say that, look at them. They are united, speaking one language. And then the statement that follows is that nothing shall be restrained from them because of their unity. So when you are unified, as you've rightly said, it makes you unstoppable. It makes you immovable. And then again in Psalms 133, there's a whole scripture on unity. And it talks, the first line starts off with what a blessing it is to God when all of us dwell in unity. And it ends the psalm by saying that when we are in unity, he commands. He doesn't suggest or recommend. He commands a blessing. So unity is very, very biblically, it's a serious and clear biblical principle. But unity also is, again, an Ubuntu principle.
Yeah.
So, and this is why I love to talk about Ubuntu, because it is a biblical principle.
Yes. Yes.
It promotes the concept of us and we and not I. Because the I principle, which is very Western oriented and which is very more capitalistic kind of oriented, self is rooted in self.
Yeah.
But the Ubuntu principle is rooted in biblical principles. It's the Ubuntu principle is the principle of we. It's the principle of all of us winning. It's the principle of sharing. It's the principle of ensuring that all have enough. So to answer your question, how do we ensure that unity is by going back to our African, which are kingdom-based principles. And unfortunately, we've abandoned our principles, which are rooted in sound biblical doctrine. We've abandoned them as Africans through having been colonized, because when the colonizer came, the colonizer convinced us that anything that had to do with Africa, our way of dress, our speech, our food, anything that we did was wrong. And he convinced us to take after them, to dress like them, to talk like them. I mean, I happen to have grown up in the United States. I'm 100% African. I grew up in the US and in Canada. So it has, of course, affected my intonation, but thankfully, I can I can speak all my African languages, and I don't speak them with an accent. But you know,
food.
I eat my African food, whether it's pap in South Africa or sadza in Zimbabwe or palic in Botswana or fufu in Nigeria, gari, fried yams, pounded yams, plantains, whatever. I eat my African food. I love my African clothing, my African values. I cherish them and keep them strong, close to me. So unfortunately, colonization, one of the things that the colonizer will always do is to convince you that your ways are inferior. Your clothing is inferior. Your speech is inferior. Your language is inferior. Your whole way of life is inferior. And so, and tell you and convince you that his ways, it's better to speak his language and with his accent and with wearing his clothes and, sipping tea in the hot, hot summer of Africa. That's why you are a lawyer, Emmy, and so am I. And I'm always amazed when I go to the opening of the High Court, when I used to practice in High Court, and I would see these judges and lawyers with white blonde wigs. And,
In the heat.
in the heat with bibs up to here, white bibs and black gowns. And we are sweating, pouring sweat in this heat. And I would look at how ridiculous we looked with this horsehair on our head, white blonde horsehair on somebody who's very dark. And wearing this getup. And I would always ask myself, but why couldn't we come up with our own uniform? A nice safari kind of that is adapted to our weather. But those are the fruit of being colonized. And that you and I would go to court, and most of the lawyers feeling very, yes, my learned friend, feeling very important, but sweating buckets and very uncomfortable, but feeling very, very learned and very educated. You see, my learned friend. That is the effect of the colonizer. You've been thoroughly colonized when you are uncomfortable with the way you are dressing and looking, but because the colonizer has told you that this is what it means to be civilized.
Yeah, to be civilized. Yeah.
And you think you're civilized because you
Yeah.
are speaking the Queen's English with a certain intonation, sweating buckets, but wearing the Queen's uniform, you know, stuff like that.
In the
So
hot sun.
unfortunately now we have abandoned our Ubuntu values, all that is good, all that
It's
made us
beautiful.
a most powerful continent. You would have done the history and study and known about the artifacts.
Yeah.
One of the things we're pursuing now is reparation for Africa. And
Yeah.
part of the reparation means bringing back the artifacts, the bronze and the gold and all the things that were stolen from Africa and are put in the museums there. I think some are being returned to Egypt.
Yeah.
The level of mathematical, intellectual expertise and knowledge concerning mathematics and science. Africa was that continent that was leading in terms of resources, in terms of knowledge, in terms of medical understanding. We were always leading, but those were the times and days of Ubuntu. And to us in Africa, I say to us, it's time to shed off that colonial past. It's time to shed off those colonial values, that slavery mentality that has the true impoverishment of Africa is not so much through lack of resources, but through our slavery mentality. And it's time to throw that off and put back our cloaks of Ubuntu, of Butu, of Ajoshe, of esteeming one another, of community, of loving one another, of helping one another, of winning together. Those are the values that will enrich us. Those are the values that will ensure that we win. And those are the values that we can teach the rest of the world and the globe. Those are the values that will bring change. And those are the values that will ensure that there truly is a renaissance d'Afrique. Renaissance d'Afrique. And that we will go back to what formerly was and not be living under the shadow of a colonial past and seeing things like a medical doctor leaving his home just so he can be in his colonizer's home, wanting to desire to be in France. So he can say, I'm in the colonizer's home. And you leave as a medical doctor and you end up sweeping the floors of Dorly airport, the airport of Dorly, because they will not qualify you as a medical doctor there. And so medical doctors are leaving Africa to go and sweep Heathrow Airport, but they are happy to be sweeping in their colonizer's nation just as long as they're there. That is an enslaved mentality. Enslaved mentality. As we would say in Nigeria, Tofi Akwa, God forbid. May the Africans, may we arise truly as Africans, knowing who we are, knowing the wealth of our values, knowing the wealth of our African culture, knowing the beauty of our traditions, which are biblically enshrined and rooted. May we arise as Africans to embrace the good of all of those cultures. And make sure that they bring us into, they transition us into a new era where we can stand tall and firm as Africans, knowing that we are moving forward together, not just as a privileged few, but together, all empowered in the village, empowered wherever we are. Everybody has food on the table. Everybody's eating. Everybody has access to education. Everybody has access to health. Everybody has access to wellness. We are a family unit. We are not split up. We are not buying into these trends around divorce and gender confusions and all that. But we are a strong family unit because as Africans, we believe in the family. The family is the foundation and the pillar of society. A dysfunctional family means a dysfunctional society. And we will not be dysfunctional. So going back to our family roots, the extended family, loving one another, moving together as a community, ensuring that we are all empowered.
Absolutely, 100%. And just to put on a practical note before we close, I know that you've been involved perhaps in the last year or two on the issue of family in South Africa, in education and in schools. You and a group of people are reversing certain systems that have been put in place that were challenging the family. The issue I want to ask, which other people would want to know, is the issue of courage. We know the answers. We have the values in us. There are a few Africans who don't know the values within them. They may choose to ignore them or allow other teachings to brainwash them. But the issue is we know what to do. But the courage to do it, I admire your courage. And many people that I know you, they say, Dr. Pearl Cooper, she is bold. She is courageous. And what you are saying, many people know it, but it's now the courage to get out there and exercise it. Like you say, not only as an individual, but as a group. So how can you, what would you like to, can you say something to the audience about courage in the context of what you are confronting a lot of issues. I know that, but I'm just talking about this particular one as an example where you were confronting systems in Southern Africa on the family and the systems and attitudes that were attacking family unity, family values, children and parenting. I know that's an issue you've been very involved with many. How have you done that? And the courage.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if it can be said I have courage, but what I can say is this, is that you cannot separate courage from purpose. Courage and purpose go hand in hand. And so when you have truly understood your purpose in life, for me, I think then that courage comes naturally because you understand that you were born for this. And our purpose in life is never about self.
No.
Purpose in life is never about you. When you have been given gifts, those gifts are redemptive gifts to redeem society, to redeem the community. So when you and I come to the understanding that whatever we've been given, whether it's gifts, whether it's talent, whether it's resources, that we've been given those gifts, those resources, those talents for the betterment of society, so that other people may live better. People may benefit from our gifts, from our teachings, from our encouragement, from all of that. When you truly understand that you were born for that, born to leave a legacy, born to leave a footprint, born to make a transformation, born to make a difference. And like I always say, that we were born, we were made to be thermostats, not thermometers.
Yes.
Because thermometers only measure the temperature. But thermostats have the ability and capacity to change the temperature. So we were not just born to keep status quo, maintain status quo. We were born to change. If it's too hot, we were born to bring the temperature down. If it's too cold, we were born to raise the temperature. So once you and I truly understand that we were born to be those thermostats, to be that salt, to be that light that makes a change, that brings, affects darkness. Once you understand that, for me, the courage comes naturally because there's no other option than to line up with that mandate to bring transformation. So courage doesn't become an option anymore. Courage becomes what you have to do. It is a non-negotiable. In fact, I don't even think of it in those terms as courage. I just think of it as what I have to do. It just has to be done. So when you say I'm courageous, it surprises me. All I know is I'm trying to line up and fulfill my God-given mandate and my ordained purpose. So courage has to do with understanding your purpose, the purpose that God has given you for the community, for the world, for the people around you. When you don't understand that you've been given a purpose towards others, you can never have courage. and you will never be able to leave that legacy of sustainable change.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I like what you say about, I mean, we talked earlier about Daniel, what you talked about Joseph and how he changed the government. There's also the story of Daniel in the Bible and how he changed the government. He was a man from, he was from one part of the country. He was brought into Babylon, a completely foreign, and yet he managed to gather and command the audience of the king and the leadership of that state.
Yeah.
It is possible. It is.
You know what's I love about that scripture? There's one verse that always hits out at me. It says that Daniel sat at the king's table. So that's telling us he was extremely influential. He was sitting with the who's who. He was sitting with the leaders, national leaders. But then it qualifies it and said that he did not eat. He did not partake in terms of the food there. And that's one of the greatest lessons that God has had to teach me. That I cannot separate myself from the world. I need to be seated at the tables, the governing tables, the marketplace tables. And some of these tables are Babylonian tables.
Yes, they are.
Remember, Daniel was in Babylon, you know, and Joseph was in Egypt. And symbolically in the Bible, it symbolizes places that where there's corruption and perversion. But the qualifier is that they did not eat of the food. So it means even though you sit at those high levels of governance, you sit with the world leaders, you sit in those you know, those world forums, like God has given me that privilege to, but you do not eat that same food of corruption. So our mandate is to be salt. Our mandate is to be in Babylon, but not be of Babylon. Is to be in Egypt, but to not take on the Egyptian culture, but to bring change in the Egyptian. So that's why God had to take Moses out of Egypt. Tell him you are not an Egyptian. Take him to the backside of the mountain where he began to understand kingdom cultures and principles through Jethro, his mentor. Once he understood that, God sent him back to Egypt now to bring change. So Moses grew up in Egypt. He understood the Egyptian language, the Egyptian principles, because you can never change a system that you don't understand actually how it operates. So God only sent him back to go and change Egypt and bring my people out of Egypt. When he had now given him the kingdom principles. This is who you truly are, Moses. So that is our job as salt, is to go into Babylon, not to avoid those places, to go there, to sit at the governmental high tables, to sit in the judiciary, to sit in the executive. Isaiah 33:22 says, for the Lord is judge, the Lord is lawgiver, the Lord is king. He shall save us. So those are the three arms of government. You've heard me say it many times. The Lord is judge, he's the judiciary. The Lord is lawgiver, he's the legislature, and the Lord is king, he's the executive. So government and governance starts with God. And if we are sons of God, we must represent him everywhere. We are sons who manage our Father's estate, and we must be in every one of those areas as the ecclesia, a group of consecrated, set apart people who function as the National Assembly of on heaven, God's National Assembly on earth.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. So obviously this video will be listened to by many people all over the world, and we in the context of Africa Renaissance, change, transformation. I know you teach a lot on in fact, I first heard about transformational leadership from you all those years ago, but I digress. But what I want to hear now, what I would like you to do for us now as we come to a close, a lot of what you said is information that people already know, particularly if you're raised in Africa. You know these things, but we talked about the challenges, we talked about the barriers, we talked about barriers to integrity, challenges of integrity, ministers of health going off, flying to other countries to get their operations and their children done, leaving an hospital in the village unmanned, and all those things. So we all know that it's wrong. What I'd like you to do for us now, as we draw to a close, is I'm thinking of people who've been listening to this, myself included, as sort of graduates who are just at the end of a graduation where they've learned something. They've listened to a teaching. They've learned it because they already know the things you're talking about. I would like you to put out a charge to the leaders that are going to hear this, regardless of which area of leadership they are. But our African leaders, whether they be in the health ministry, in education, in a school, whether they be in a home, whether it's a mom in the kitchen looking after children, she's a leader, whether it's a church leader, whether it's a church pastor, church in Africa, I want you to put out, as the Lord leads you, a charge to them to take on whatever God puts on your heart. As you know what I'm saying when I say give a charge, right? And then we can bring that to a close.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Thank you so much. As we've already said, this is time. It's Africa's time. And the sons of the soil need to rise up to their God-given mandate in this time. God is taking Africa out of her past and moving her into her new season. Africa, you will no longer be a begging bowl, but you will be that bread basket. We have the resources. We have the knowledge. We have the values. We have the culture that is needed in this season to be that bread basket, a bread basket of values, a bread basket of knowledge and expertise, a bread basket to bring solutions, economic solutions that are Ubuntu based, a bread basket to bring medical solutions, not only to Ebola and HIV, but even to this COVID. Some of the solutions are in Africa, but it's going to take us rising up at an individual level. Take ownership for the gifts that God has given you, whether you are a housewife or whether you are a corporate executive. Begin to take ownership and see how you can allow God to use you to bring transformation in the sphere that you are, the medical sphere, the legal sphere, the governmental sphere, the communication sphere, the entrepreneurial sphere, the technological sphere. Take ownership and begin to purpose that I'm going to make a change. I'm going to leave a legacy. I'm going to leave a footprint. I'm going to leave sustainable change. I'm going to be accountable. I'm not going to be part of the corruption group. I will reject perversion. I will reject bribery. But I'm not only going to make a change in terms of my own life. I will be the change and I will bring change. I will influence change. I will be that thermostat. I will be a thermostat around me wherever I go, influencing change, bringing saltiness, adding flavor, pushing back darkness as light. That is our responsibility. So I want to encourage you to be bold and be courageous. Fear not. And know that you will leave a legacy. It starts where you are at. What do you have in the house? Take up whatever you have in the house. Take up those talents. Take up that gifting. Take up those resources. Connect yourself with destiny helpers. Forge partnerships. Form synergies. And let's together do it together as a corporate group of people walking in Ubuntu and saying, Simunye, we are one. Moving Africa forward and pushing us forward as a community, as a group of people who are focused not on self, but focused on winning for all. So God bless you and thank you so much, Emmy. I've enjoyed myself, and again, I appreciate you, your love for Africa, your passion for Africa, your giving. You have such a giving heart. You always just looking for places to give financially and otherwise. So the Lord richly reward you and bless all your efforts.
Thank you so much, Apostle. And just want to thank you you are so busy. I know your calendar is packed, but I just thank you for the time you've taken out to give us this charge, to give us advice and guidance. You are one of the voices that God has raised in these times for the African continent to develop. God loves us as a people. God has not forgotten the Africans, and the answers are in us as we follow Jesus, as we take on his word and imbibe his word into our practices daily, and as we move forward in unity, in courage, and in boldness. God will never leave us nor abandon us. We are not the second cousin or the race that he created by accident. No, he didn't. He wants us to be sitting at the table with kings, with him in the midst of us. So brothers and sisters, take courage and listen to Apostle Pearl. There will be a link on the bottom of the video on how you can get in touch with her, how you can get in touch with the work that she's doing, and how you can be a part of it as well for the progress and development of your community, your family, yourself as an individual. And you start with where you are. Apostle's been saying you start with yourself. You start with where you are. You start with the family. You start with your children and take it forward into the community and into the nation. And together we cannot but win. Integrity, personal integrity, listening to the voice of God on integrity, applying integrity in what we do and who we are is the way forward, is our own way of renaissance and rebirthing a new Africa that would develop without corruption and without the bribery system. Thank you so much, Apostle. Just want to say thank you to all our viewers. Please keep in touch. Thank you.
Thank you. God bless you.